Hello, Fearless Gamers! Matt here for Fearless Games, and today I'm going to do a little bit of a video update for Legends of War / painting tutorial. Today, I'm going to talk about how I paint my Dark Angel Space Marine army. So, in the Legends of 40k series that we have right now, we've got HQ done now. It's one troop choice. Mine was a 5-man squad of Marines with a drop pod. And so I'm going to go over the basic painting style that I use to make this unit. Now, when it comes to painting skills, I'm high basic, average type painting. I'm not really that good at all. But I know a lot of different techniques, and I'm slowly honing my skills on all of them. So what we're going to be using is the new Citadel paint lineup with a little bit of the old paint lineup. If there's a paint color that translates to the new paint line, I will put the name of the new paint color over what I say I actually use. We're going to be using Citadel paints in the bases, the washes, the shades, which are the washes, the glazes, and all that fun stuff. And so I'm going to basically go step by step how I paint my Dark Angel Space Marines. And so, let us begin.
First things first is I sprayed the entire model in a cheap can of spray paint to make it black. Nothing fancy, just something I got at Walmart for about 60 cents or so. I then assembled the legs and the torso together, leaving the arms, backpack, and head off. That way I can get to every part of the model and not miss a spot. I then take my first color, Citadel Base Caliban Green, and I paint the entire model up in this color. Now, one thing to note is don't be too frightened if you accidentally get a part of the model that's not supposed to be this colored green, because we can always go over it again with the color that's supposed to be. But that's not to say just slather the paint right on. Try to avoid painting the spots that aren't supposed to be green, but don't go killing yourself trying to do so. As Bob Ross used to say, there are no mistakes, just happy accidents. And if you find that your paint's a little too thick, wipe a little bit of it off on a piece of tissue paper, or dab a small bit of water on the brush, and then wipe it on a piece of tissue paper. The goal is to paint the armor and give it a nice clean coat. You don't want the paint to be too thick, like I said, because you'll ruin all the detail, but you don't want it to be too thin again, because then it's just not going to cover the model at all. Once the entire model was painted green, I then took the shade color Beltan Green, and I coated the model in this shade. Now, normally some models they tend to just use their wash brush and coat the whole model, but for this case, I only put it in the crevices of the model, where the creases of the shoulder pads, the joints in the arms and the feet, and like the small little indentations in the torso. Because sometimes the wash will give it this weird look that it looks like it's been washed over. So I just try and avoid that and go into just where I know the little cricks and crevices are going to be. Any shade that tends to coat over the areas that aren't a deep recess, I then just went over again with Caliban Green, just to smooth it out so it looked less like there was some sort of stain applied to the model, which is what I tend to notice with this. Now, I have heard in a lot of the video tutorials that Games Workshop has produced them using Null Oil. It is a decent color to use, but I find that it just gives it this too dark of a shade, whereas Beltan Green kinda gives the crevices this darker green look and kinda enhances the green effect that you want on the model, really making that green shine without being overly green, in a sense. Just basically giving it the right amount of dark green that we'd want on our model, because the Dark Angels are fairly dark, but not completely dark to the point where they almost look black. Once the wash has been finished and the touches up have been done, I then moved on to painting the eagle crest on the front of his chest, which I coated in shining gold. The reason why I'm doing it now instead of finishing up the model is just mainly because we do the green at the highlights I do at the very end of the model project. So at this point, it's now getting all the model parts that I need painted before assembling the arms and head and backpack to it. So the first thing, like I said, gonna do is the winged skull piece on the chest plate. Now the next color that I use is the bolt gun metal. This I apply to the little wires that are on the little chest cavity right between his belt and the eagle, the belt buckle, and any type of wires that I see hanging off the model. And by the time that I'm finished with the bolt gun metal, I can then move back to the other color that I wish to apply to the chest piece, which is varnished gold. I do this to try and enhance the coloring of the skull wings, so I try to just do a very light brush over. This way I can cover the paint on the model without going into all the deep recesses, hiding all the shining gold that I just painted. At this point, since I'm pretty much getting done waiting for the items to dry, I'm going to apply the model to the base itself. And to make life easier, I put a pin on the model's foot. That way it can get a little bit more stability and get closer to the bottom of the base now that the flock and all that has been applied to it. And now we'll have an easy stand that'll make painting the rest of the model 10 times easier without constantly placing our fingers on the model piece itself. The next thing I do is I use a bit of plastic glue and put the backpack on the Space Marine. I use plastic glue for this mainly because plastic glue does take a little bit longer to dry than super glue, so I have a better chance of fitting the model piece in before it actually settles. So in essence, this guarantees that any type of misplacement I do can be fixed. This is also the time where I will rig the model's arms onto the base. Now, what I try to do with this one is I don't add the bolter to his hands just yet. I leave that piece separate. That way I can take it out and still get to the rest of the model that the bolter would normally block. So I'm mainly only using it here to line up the arms. One thing to try and keep in mind when setting the arms on your Space Marines is it's tiny little things like this that add character to the Space Marine. It basically can set up action, setting up to fire, holding up the gun, and keeping a lookout while ready to point at any enemy target, loading a clip into the gun, and little tiny things like that, which just give the characters each a bit of personality and has each model stand out on its own, giving it that one little bit of spark of life that they would normally not have if they were all looking exactly the same. With the arms fit and set, I can continue on with my coloring of this model. And again, we still leave the head off, just until later. I take Null Oil Shade, and this is where I apply it to all the metal bits on the Space Marine model, which would be the Golden Eagle on his front here, or the Golden Winged Skull, the wires, the belt buckles, and the plates on the backpack, and that little wire that's sitting on his foot. What's nice about the Null Oil is especially with the metal colors, it helps bring out the lines and detail on the model, but it also gives it this old, oiled up look. Sort of like as most times they say that the Adeptus Mechanicum uses, sacred oils and such to bless the machine, spirits, and appease it in a sense. So this kind of gives the look that the armor has been recently blessed by the Mechanicum to try and make sure that it operates at optimal efficiency. Once the shade is done, I can then start painting the bolter. Actually, I usually do this while the shade is drying. The first color I apply to this bolter is the gun chassis, which I use Scab Red. The reason for this is because red is a very nice color that complements the Dark Angel's armor and helps the bolter stick out rather than having it blend into the armor and practically disappear when it's sitting on the model. I also try to always drill out the holes in my bolters. That way it gives the little bit of extra realism to it. I take a little drill bit and I drill right through the side hole, the flash hole in the bolter shot, and then I also drill out the center. This way people can look through the holes and see kind of give it more of, in essence, more of that it's a miniature person rather than just a miniature action figure, and just adds a little bit more personality and realism to the model's appearance. at this point, it is pretty much safe to put the bolter on the model. So, taking our plastic glue, we then apply the bolter into the hands of the Space Marine. Now, don't get discouraged if you don't have plastic glue. Super glue works just as well. It's just that you're going to have to be precise and avoid making any mistakes while applying the bolter or any part of the model together, because super glue just doesn't allow you enough time to really fix up any mistakes that you may make. Now the next part is we're going to finish up the bolter and take a bit of blood red and apply it to the bolter that we just painted. Now because the bolter is attached to his chest, it makes it a little bit easier for shading the bolter itself. All we have to do is paint the pieces that are exposed on the outside of the model. So basically the front part of the bolter and the side part right where the barrel is. And you can pretty much leave the part that's facing his chest alone, because his body's going to cast a natural shadow on that part of the bolter. Now I move on to the first highlight of the model. For this one, I use Citadel Layer Paint Warpstone Glow. Now, this is using basically the standard Games Workshop way of highlighting, which is edge highlighting. This will require a detail brush, so in essence, you need a brush with a very fine point. And what we do is basically as it says. We go over every edge of the model. Now, I'm not saying just the corner points, I mean basically the edge lining. This enhances the armor just a little bit and kind of shows the points where the model armor bends and stuff like that. And this gives it a nice little dynamic light and helps enhance the green color that we placed on the model. This is a very tedious process and will require a lot of practice to get down. Even I'm still very novice at it, and it's something I just started doing myself. So don't get disgruntled if the edge highlighting doesn't come out absolutely perfect. Now we move on to the thinner layer on the thinner highlight layer, using Citadel Layer Paint Moot Green. This is going to be it's going to be a little bit easier, but a little tricky at the same time. What you do is you only put it at the finer points of the model, the curves of corners, and usually I'll also add it into the center piece of a straight line. Like here on the neck piece, I'm putting it right across the middle. That way, I only have that one piece very light green, and then I have the farther edges this darker green. And then I do, like I said, the corners of shoulder pads, and basically making round corners. It kind of helps advance the color, and kind of gives them more of this three-dimensional look. Again, this is a very, very tricky thing to do because it requires a very steady hand, and the lines have to be a lot thinner. For this, it's best to use a fine detail brush, so a really thin pointed brush itself. And hopefully you can see this over my big fat head covering the lens of the camera. Now when we highlight the bolter, we're going to use some Troll Slayer Orange, and we're going to do a slight edge highlight along the bolter itself, going across the top of the chassis piece of the casing, that little nub on the top over the rail, and the little piece that runs along the side of the bolter. Again, ignoring the parts that are covered up by the chest, because the chest piece is there, which casts a shadow, so a highlight wouldn't really be seen on that side of the bolter. Now I start painting the head, and I do apologize because this is going to get a little bit out of focus because I didn't plan ahead for this part of the project, and I do apologize. Now with that out of the way, as you can see, I put the helmet on a thumbtack. I did this to make it a little bit easier to paint without getting my fingers in the way of whatever I'm doing. Now what we're going to do is we're going to do the eyes, which I started with a base of Caramite White, and then I took the shade color Carroburg Crimson and applied it to it. What this does is the Carabin Crimson shade helps enhance the color and makes the white appear red, but because of the way that the shade works, it gives a nice natural highlight, making the eyes sort of look like they're glowing, in a sense. Now I move on to painting the bolter. Again, I used bolt gun metal for this, mainly because I figured it's a fitting color to use for a gun that has the same name, in essence. Again, we try to avoid painting the parts that are covered by his hands and the pieces that are blocked by his chest, mainly so we only go as far as we can that would relatively give the idea that there's a shadow there, but wouldn't be necessarily altered to look black because of how close it is to his chest. This way, it gives the gun a little bit more of a three-dimensional effect, and we give a cheap way of doing shadows on the bolt gun itself. And at this point is when I attach the head of the model onto the body. And again, we try to make the head position in such a way to give it a little bit more definition. This way, we kind of give the character a little bit more of a action pose that he's doing. So this is something you should really take into good long consideration, because it will add a lot of character to your model with a very little bit of effort on your part. Now at this stage, I decide to go and clean up the joints of the armor plating, coating them in Abaddon Black. This way they get a nice really dark contrast, and you can see the different joints in the armor, and they don't basically disappear and get lost in the green by being not painted black, in essence. And later on, if you'd like to add a little bit of detail to them, you can edge highlight them with a gray paint color. For me, I probably use something like Codex Gray, or an equivalent too. Now I move on to the final stage of the green armor, which is the glaze. So at this point, I would use the glaze color Way Watcher Green. Now what the glaze is going to do is it's going to kind of solidify all the colors together and really make them all complement each other really nicely. And it's also going to tone down our highlights so they're not so out there and screaming at your face with them. The glazes are a really nice way to help blend in a lot of colors, because you're going to notice at times that the colors don't really mesh up too well, but they're the only color you can really use at your disposal. And so applying a wash to it will help tone down the colors so they complement each other a lot nicer than they were prior to the wash. I then apply a wash to the bolter using Null Oil again. And in case anyone's wondering, because I forgot to mention it before, the little tint dark metal bit that I used on the little eagle symbol on the front there, that is tin bits. And again, we apply this Null Oil shade to that little eagle and the bolt gun itself. Now we're going to move on to the Purity Seal. Now this color scheme can also be used for robes and Deathwing Terminators. We first start off with some Zandri dust and apply it to the Purity Seal parchment. And now we take some Ironbreaker layer paint and use it to highlight the metal edges along all the bolt gun metal parts that we used. This will help, it's basically another edge highlighting that we're doing, so you'd want a very fine detail brush, and only apply it to small bits of the raised edges and the little details on the bolt clip or the muzzle of the gun and stuff like that. You don't want to go too crazy, because too much will basically ruin the effect, or as too little is going to make it where you might as well not have done it at all. You have to try and find a happy medium. Now we apply a shade to the parchment we just painted, using the shade Seraphim Sepra. And while we wait for that to dry, we can then add the red piece to the wax seal at the top of it. And for this, we're using Blood Red. With the shade dry, we can then go on to the final piece of the highlight, which is bleach bone. And what we do is we try to only paint the raised edges of the parchment while leaving the recesses alone. This to help to create the illusion of shade. This would be a good time also if you'd like to add your chapter symbol's company symbol to their shoulder, to their piece. For Dark Angels, they place this on their left shoulder, their left knee pad. And for this one, I chose the fourth company, which is a half circle of bleach bone, followed by a checker pattern, which I create first with skull white or ceramite white, whichever you prefer, and then to create the blocks. I then applied a coat of Abaddon black to some of these squares, as per noted in the Dark Angels Codex as to the pattern setup, and then touched up the white spots again with the ceramite white, or the skull white, depending on which one you have, and leave it at that. This is a test that's going to be very tedious, and you may want to practice this a couple of times on some test models before actually applying it to any of your Space Marine models yourself, because this is very difficult and will require a very steady hand and a lot of patience and a very fine tip brush. Then we're going to apply the chapter marker's water transfers on this model. Thankfully, I did put the shoulder pad on his left piece, so I don't have to worry about the Dark Angel symbol, so I only have to worry about the troop markings. And at first, we have to prime the shoulder pad with Adcoat. This is going to help make the transfer apply a lot smoother. Now, honest and for truly, if you can avoid this at all costs, it's worth going out to Games Workshop and buying the specific chapter shoulder pads, because a lot of the water transfers for a lot of the chapter pieces don't work out too well. So if you can, buy their shoulder pads. Now with the shoulder pad primed, and again this can be used for either shoulder pad depending if you want to go the route and try and use the water transfers for your chapter symbol, we then cut out the water transfer symbol that we're going to use and place it on a piece of paper, like a towel or a tissue. We then take a wet brush and dab the water transfer in water, making sure to get it all saturated. And you want it to sit for about 30 seconds or so. If you're not sure if the water transfer is ready for apply, just simply tab it with your brush, and if it slightly moves, it's ready to go. And then what you would do is you would pick up the transfer, preferably with the brush, and bring it to your model, and then with a wet brush, slide it onto the model's shoulder's pad. Keeping your brush very saturated with water, this will help with getting the water transfer in place. Once the water transfer is properly in place in the spot that you want it to be, take a tissue or paper towel and lightly dab the shoulder pad to get rid of any excess water. With the water transfer dry, we can now work on getting rid of that little shiny effect that's happened by the Adcoat and the water transfer itself, and again also sealing it to make it a lot easier to make sure that it doesn't fall off. We use Larahim Medium, I know I said that wrong completely, and apply it to all the parts where the Adcoat was applied and across the water transfer. What this is going to do is it's going to seal the transfer in place, and it's also going to get rid of that shiny effect. And finally, we're going to add one little bit of highlight to the Purity Seal's red wax seal with the Karenberg Crimson. This is going to basically dull out the red and give us a nice dark shade in the recesses, giving it a really nice look to the model itself. And then that is it. You are all done. Your result is a beautifully painted Dark Angel Space Marine, as the way the vet does it. Now again, this is not the best and the perfect way of painting them, but it's a really nice start to help you move along with your painting skills. Like I said, not too great, but when combined with all the other dudes, it can produce a very beautiful effect that will look great on any tabletop.
And there you have it. That's how I paint my Dark Angel Space Marine army. My techniques aren't really that great, and I still have a lot of work to go, but I feel that I've gone leaps and bounds from when I first started playing in this game. I went with this style because, again, I'm planning on doing a very drop pod heavy army. That way I could just, you know, plant stuff wherever I need, and even if I don't put the dudes in the drop pods, I have drop pods to be annoying on the field where need be, and get a bunch of storm bolters everywhere. And so, after this, you know, I'm just waiting for everyone else to finish, and once we get up, we're going to do our next battle report with them, and then it'll be a second troop choice, which for me is probably going to be a 10-man squad with a drop pod and a plasma cannon and a plasma gun, because it's time to get plasmy with these Dark Angels, because, as most people know, Dark Angels love plasma, and like any good Dark Angels player, I'm going to fit it in wherever I can possibly. So, if you want to see more pictures of these guys, plus pictures of everyone else's work, check out our Facebook. I'll put a link in the description here. And that's all for now. Until next time, Fearless Gamers, take care!